All right, well, I want to welcome everyone to Green Affordable Housing, a state-by-state review. And before we get started, we always got to do our membership spotlight, and a huge congratulations to Runbrook Homes for their Platinum Award, winner of the Design Mixed Use category at the GCBA 2023 Prism Awards. It was an award for residential green building certifications handed out by the Gold Coast Builders Association of Florida. If you don't know who Runbrook is, they are not just a GreenHome Institute member, but a lead Green Rater partner for GHI. You can learn more about them and contact them to assist you on your next residential green building project. You can find them on our Find a Pro page with all of our members who do this. And you know, this is who GHI members are. This is what GHI members do. And so can you. Go to our website, get signed up, learn more about the benefits there today. And before we get started, we need to say a huge thanks to one of our top supporting gold level sponsors, Sun Radon. Now, Sun Radon has devices that clearly and visually communicate to you and your clients ongoing health issues and air quality issues that might be occurring within your residential units or housing spaces. It gives specific information. Green, good; yellow, okay; red, bad, right? No more specific than that. And it looks at main categories such as total volatile organic compounds in the air, humidity, air pressure, temperature. It even looks at humidity and temperature over time to determine mold risk and gives you a mold risk report. And as its name suggests, looks at radon, which is the second cause of lung cancer under smoking. And if you have multifamily projects, you know there's a lot of smoking situations that occur. And so paired with smoking, radon is a double whammy for that. So you want to make sure that you're helping your clients out in all of your properties. They've got a great way that you can install these devices across all of your properties and get a good assessment of what's going on in the air and just make that informed decision. So check them out over at sunradon.com. Check out the loop and learn more about how to help make your spaces healthier. All right, so again, welcome everyone to Green Affordable Housing, a state-by-state review. This course is brought to you by the GreenHome Institute. The GreenHome Institute is a nonprofit with a mission to empower people to make healthier and more sustainable choices in the renovation and construction of the places we live. We are a small but mighty team of three. And today I will not only be your moderator, but I will be speaking a little bit at the beginning of this session and contributing to the course. And my name is Brett Little. I am the education manager here. As always, our course is approved for multiple continuing education units, including our certified Green Home Professional designation with all 5 pillars of green. You can pick them up here. As well as AIA, Health, Welfare, and Safety, which may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license, and Passive House US Institute Certified Professional Consultant. Check that out with the 5-digit code that's coming your way. So before we get into this review that was done by our members, longtime members over at the BlueGreen Alliance Foundation, I want to make sure all of us are on the same page when we're talking about the green building certifications that are being discussed here during this session that are typically used for low-income housing tax credits and other, HUD just released some funding under the Green Retrofit Program. A lot of other local programs reference these green building programs. So whether you're doing LIHTC or any kind of funding, national, state-based, city-based, a lot of them all reference these particular programs as a way to make sure that our tax dollars are spent in a way that are ensuring people are getting healthy and affordable, energy-efficient living. So the main programs that go into these are Lead for Homes, Home Innovations Lab, National Green Building Standard, and Enterprise Green. Now, those are your main 3 green programs, but now we're also seeing Passive House Institute US or FIUS crop up as another way to do this. Now, to be clear, Passive House is not a green program. It falls short by 2 of the pillars of green, and we'll talk a little bit about that briefly, but it's not what I would call a green program. So I have it kind of cockeyed there a little bit. It's close. It's getting close. Not quite there, but it's also showing up. So it's worth noting, and it's a great program. So Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, one of the first ever programs out the gate for residential housing. It looks at single family, multifamily, mixed use, high-rise buildings, and it ensures third-party verification, quality assurance, and meeting some top-tier energy and health performance for sustainability. And again, it's the most well-known program out of all of these mentioned. Now, under that is the Enterprise Green Communities program. That was the second one to come online. You could almost think of it as LEED for affordable housing, but it's come out with a 2020 program, and it certainly went in a slightly different direction than LEED. In many cases, it doesn't have, first of all, a gold or platinum rating or silver rating. It just really is a points program that you certify at a certain level. And it's starting to really focus on the early design stage and the occupants being heavily involved and making sure that their voices are heard. So it has certainly a big equity piece to it. And then Home Innovations Lab, believe it or not, while the least well-known of all these programs, is probably the most well-used. And it's a program established by the home builders, and it's really tied to the construction codes and ICC, and it references those codes, and it looks at performance across all its energy and health and green sectors for certain tiers. And it takes a bit of a biggest loser approach for energy for renovation, where you look at the building as it is and as it could be and make improvements that way. And CEUS is super energy efficiency, all like focused on a super tight building envelope and low energy use HVAC, probably all electric, reduced air leakage. And it's really, again, focused on that key aspect of energy with some health and ventilation components also. So if you're looking at these green building programs, first you have to have an understanding of what the 5 pillars of green are, because they all reference the 5 pillars of green in one way or another: energy efficiency, health, which goes beyond air quality and looks at sound and other aspects, mental health, water conservation, materials, so that's durability of the material, where the materials are coming from, embodied carbon, and then place. How does the building fit within its place? What is the sense of place? And how does climate change impact the building, which is growing more important? So if you don't understand the 5 pillars of green, we have some courses on the basics of residential green building that you can take a look at and understand, what is going into all of these green building programs, because today is not the day that we're going to be spending a lot of time on the technical side, but we have that for you. You can check that out. But let's go over some of the basics before we hand it off to our main speakers today. One thing that's important to know when you're looking at these green building programs is choice versus requirements. And so you can see here on the bottom, you're looking at heavily choice-based programs. And as you go up, it gets more and more prerequisites and less, I would say, kind of less and less choice. And you might say, choice, I want more choice. I want to be able to do whatever I want. Well, that comes with a trade-off, because when there's more choice, you have to spend more time trying to figure out what to do. So on the tops of these programs, it's like cut and dry, black and white. You've got to do this to meet the standard, and there's no question. And again, as you go lower down the chain, there are more things that you got to figure out, make decisions on. So it just depends on what you want to be spending your time doing. Do you want you to kind of be told what to do? Here's the parameters, or do you want to spend a lot of time? So there's no right answer. So what we've done is we've put together a document, and it's attached in the handout we've given you. And it kind of goes through and compares these green building programs from very high level aspects. So you can take a look at that and just get a quick sense of, again, what it is you'd be expected to do and how these programs compare out there. And so I've just kind of picked out some things that really stand out to me, because we've helped administer all of these programs or consulted on them. First is energy. And that's, again, really where Passive House stands out. That is an energy efficiency program. You really need to have a HERS index rating of somewhere around 35, which is getting really close to net zero, to get Passive House certification. You can kind of see where the other programs fall within this HERS index threshold here on where they need to be. And then you typically get more points in those programs if you get further down the line to net zero. But Passive House is really the crux to getting you to net zero. And it's really just a low energy program. That's what it's all about: reducing energy usage. And that gets us into zero. So a lot of these QAPs, these low income housing tax credits, the HUD retrofit program, they give you bonus points and incentives if you can pursue a net zero program. And so enterprise defers to the Zero Energy Ready certification, which is lined right up with the $5,000 per unit under the Inflation Reduction Act. NGBS has a net zero program that allows you to use carbon offsets and renewable energy credits. Not saying that's good or bad, just making a factual statement there. And then LEED Zero, which also does the same thing. Again, they're both looking at 2 to 3 years worth of renewable energy credits to offset energy usage that isn't already offsetted by efficiency and renewables. So those are things you need to know when you're pursuing these programs. One thing I like to highlight about enterprise that I get really excited about with this program that stands out is that you really need to get engaged early. So if you're even thinking about an enterprise project right now, I'd say get off this session and go get to work, because you got to engage your tenants. You got to get their feedback, their input on everything that you're doing. You need to do climate resiliency planning, kind of like I have in the photo here. You need to understand how climate change is going to impact your building. And you need to get health surveys done and understand health impacts in the local community and how you can make your clients healthier. I really like that. Some people don't appreciate it. I know it's a lot of work, and it's something you have to start early in the design process to make sure the people who are going to be using that building have had a say. It's a very equitable approach, I think, that I appreciate. Now, LEED is really focused on indoor environmental quality, air quality. So there are a lot of things that we're looking at. Bathroom exhaust ventilation testing, whole building ventilation testing, duct leakage, air leakage, rain should. We just tested some buildings the other day that were failing in these areas. And so very important from a LEED standpoint. This is looked at more closely than anything to make sure these ventilation systems are properly functioning, and you can get extra points if you can make them even better. So that's one thing that LEED really looks at that I wanted to hone in on with them. One thing that really stands out to me from the Home Innovations Lab is this water rating index that they've created. So it really gives you a tool to sort of take a performance approach to water savings and helps you understand how water is being saved. Sadly, a lot of the green programs just kind of diminish water a little bit. It's kind of an afterthought. I really like this about the Home Innovations Lab. They're really looking at a way to kind of label the building from a water savings standpoint. And you can do a water reduction from a pre and post when you're doing a renovation. If you're using a lot of water and then save a little bit of water, you can score a little bit higher in this program. So that's one thing I appreciate about them, and hats off to the Home Innovations Lab for putting that together. So you're like, your head's spinning, all this stuff. Yeah, so we have a 2-hour course comparing the residential green building certification programs. You can check it out. If you want your Con Ed for it, there's a cost for that on the USGBC channel. Otherwise, it's totally free on our YouTube channel. You can watch it anytime. It's a 2-hour session. People have told me that's not enough time. We used to do an 8-hour session on it. It really can take a lot of time, but that's why you want to work with a residential green building consulting firm to help you think through which of these programs and which one is applicable to your state when you're engaging with your state on their QAP, which is what we are here to be talking about today. So I am excited to be having back on the show the BlueGreen Alliance Foundation. This is probably the third time the BlueGreen Alliance Foundation, a GHI member, has been on our show. So it's really exciting to have you all back. Now, Gabby and Jeff here, who I'm going to have introduce themselves, are new to our show. So welcome, Gabby and Jeff. And thank you for taking the time to put this amazing report together and help educate our audience about that. So Jeff, Gabby, I will hand it off to you. Please do take it away.
All right, Brett, thank you. Fantastic. First of all, I thank Brett and GreenHome Institute for inviting Gabby and myself to speak today. We are really excited to discuss our report, which looks at qualified allocation plans. And I think Brett has put a link to our report and some additional information in the chat earlier. So I encourage folks to take a gander at that after this presentation or as I'm speaking. That's perfectly fine. So some background on the BlueGreen Alliance Foundation. BJF works with the BlueGreen Alliance, an organization consisting of environmental groups and labor unions aimed at addressing environmental challenges and creating and maintaining good quality jobs. Primary components of BJF is Building Clean, a program both myself and Gabby work on, which aims to improve efficiency, health, and equity in affordable housing. And we try to accomplish this by investing in the health of residents, workers, and communities through the use of building products that are free of hazardous chemicals. So before diving into the report, it's probably worthwhile to take a step back and discuss what exactly are qualified allocation plans and LIHTC, the Low Income Housing Tax Credit. LIHTC was created in 1987 as part of a comprehensive federal tax reform plan and has since helped finance almost 4 million affordable rental housing units. And it's currently the nation's largest program for the production and preservation of affordable rental housing. So how it works is each year the federal government allocates these tax credits to states based off of a state's population. And while there are some federal requirements that go along with it, particularly eligibility and affordability requirements, it gives states broad discretion on how to allocate and award these tax credits. So then here's where qualified allocations come in. They are the process which states through LIHTC are allocated to developers. Every state has a qualified allocation plan. Sometimes they're specifically referenced as a QAP. Other times they're listed as guides or manuals or some sort of administrative policy. So all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and also New York City and the city of Chicago are also allocators. Majority of QAPs have threshold requirements that an applicant needs to meet in order to be eligible to receive these tax credits. But states also prioritize certain activities, whether that's assisting vulnerable populations, trying to address homelessness, energy efficiency, preserving the current housing stock. That's kind of the way focusing on urban versus rural housing. So while there's usually some similarities from state to state on their QAPs, there's also quite a bit of differentiation on how a state wants to address its current housing needs. So we began thinking about this project several years ago, and really the goal is to illuminate the current status of state QAPs and also to encourage state housing finance agencies to strengthen their QAPs on some areas of interest for us at Building Clean. We've been active in working with HFAs and their QAPs for the past few years. And we really see this as an area and really an opportunity to address what we would like to see improved in affordable housing. And I say this as an opportunity because states modify or amend their QAP essentially every year or once every 2 years. I believe Oregon is the only outlier in that and their comment period is once every 4 years. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into our findings, but I think the overarching results is that we've seen an increase in green building certifications over the past few years, and hence I think some health being addressed a little bit more, although we're not at still significant work to be done there. And there's a lack of provisions on addressing the reduction of racial equities. But I think that's also there's a glass half full perspective as states are increasingly starting to consider racial equity in their QAPs over the past few years. Looking at the grades, I think you'll see some of the usual suspects here. One of the outliers is California in terms of the lowest scoring states, as they took out their green building certification several years ago, and I think you'll see there's really a parallel in many of these states on if a requirement for a green building certification, and that state either getting a high or low score in our scorecard. To be clear, our report it's not grading qualified allocation plans as a whole. It's really focused on the 3 sections you see there: healthy building practices, energy efficiency, and racial equity. So the origins of this of our report, I think, as I mentioned, it's something that we've thought about for a number of years. So a group called Global Green did a similar scorecard from about 2001 to 2017 when they, I think, decided to just stop doing this evaluation and this research. They focus more on some health, but more on sustainability overall and resiliency issues. And so we wanted to fill this void, as I think, as in our conversations with our colleagues and other stakeholders, there was a desire to get additional information on what are some trends in qualified allocation plans. So we really wanted to take up the mantle that Global Greens previously did, but with a little bit of a twist, as we, I think, particularly with racial equity, that's an area that we think is underrepresented and wanted to do comprehensive research. There are other groups who have done significant work in the area of qualified allocation plans that I just wanted to point out really quick. Energy Efficiency for All and the National Housing Trust did a fantastic report on state strategies on energy and water efficiency. Enterprise has done great work, and particularly they did a report several years ago on health action plans. So there is other research available if you so desire to look at what states are doing in their qualified allocation plans. I think a lot of those reports are similar to the foundation for the report that we just released this summer. There is a significant amount, admittedly, there's a significant amount of subjectivity in the criteria that we look at and the methodology. I think that's fair to say. There's, as I mentioned earlier, no two QAPs are exactly the same by any means, and that has I think one of the major challenges in determining how to score the states as a whole and how they address qualified allocation plans. Brett did a fantastic review on comparing third-party building certifications. I think we found that there's I think around 15 building certifications that are referenced in QAPs. I think oftentimes you'll see those that Brett mentioned, Enterprise, LEED, and NGBS. But there's plenty more that often regional certifications as well. So trying to compare one from the other is quite difficult. While I think we may have some preferences on what some that are more aligned with affordable housing, we decided to not differentiate between one and the other, as that would really open up Pandora's box and on what we preferred and what we didn't. Another difficult decision was viewing provisions that are required versus incentivized, and then in addition, things that are encouraged. You'll often have certain situations where a state will encourage the use of low VOC paint, but it's just encouraged. It's not something that a developer has to do for a project. So we basically considered any type of encouragement like that as not including in our scoring. But for something that was required that a developer has to do, we decided to weigh that more than an incentive, as that's I think we want to list that as something for states to strive to include in their QAPs. We focus primarily on the 9% tax credit, which is the competitive low-income housing tax credit, which I think is oftentimes included in states' scoring structure within their QAPs. And also, state QAPs, they usually have at least the majority of states, a differentiation between new construction, moderate and substantial rehabilitation. So at least for the healthy building practices and energy efficiency sections, we scored separately between new construction and moderate rehabilitation. So starting with the healthy building practices section, here's a list of some of the criteria that we evaluated. Again, if a state requires or incentivizes a green building certification, that was really the first thing that we wanted to look at. We kind of saw it as that's really the goal, but allowing states other opportunity if they have prescriptive requirements in their QAP. So like Maryland, for example, incentivizes a green building certification, but they also require green label carpeting, low VOC paint and sealants, and they ban formaldehyde from their composite wood products. At the same time, there's many states who just will require either enterprise, LEED, or NGBS for both new construction and moderate rehabilitation, and I think those states certainly scored very highly in our evaluation. There's also states like Washington, which has a model policy. Their state standards, the Evergreen Sustainable Development Standards, they're one of a few states who has a state-specific building certification, and that Washington, I think, is a prime example of a state really that focuses on the health of tenants and the health of workers, and their standard as they include mandate all sorts of healthy building practices, whether it's low VOC paints, limiting formaldehyde, and pushing for environmentally preferable materials. So kind of piggybacking on the conversation or the discussion that Brett had earlier, want to go a little bit deeper on what is some of the differences between green building certifications. We did an evaluation several years ago on not just these GBCs, and I say that loosely because I know Brett mentioned that Passive House is a green building certification, but for this example, just bear with me. But we evaluated about 20 building certifications on really all the fine details of how they address health. And so here's a look at what is mandated and what is incentivized. Enterprise is, I think, really, again, focusing on affordable housing. You'll see they mandate or incentivize a lot of the criteria that we focused on in our report, whether it's requiring interior paints and coatings to have VOC content less than or equal to air quality standards or air quality thresholds, and they also is one of the only green building certifications to incentivize ingredient transparency for material health, which I think we're looking to be more of one of a criteria that some of the more progressive states can start including in their QAPs. Enterprise, they offer points for the use of declare or health product declaration products. The IL5, their Living Building Challenge. The Living Building Challenge is also a certification that looks at ingredient transparency and requires the majority of the products to avoid red list chemical classes, chemicals that are the most hazardous to the environmental ecosystem and individuals. So that's definitely an area that we're looking to focus to push forward for states in the near future. But again, I think this reference the bottom chart. Most not insignificant amount of states would just list EGC, LEED, and NGBS as one of three options to either require or incentivize in their QAP. And then there's a few states or a few certifications that were just listed nominally. I think that the Earthcraft, Passive House, and Living Building Challenges being a few that were cited in multiple states. Again, just continuing the conversation in green building certifications, you'll see the map here, the states listed in green are states who require a green building certification in their QAP. Yellow, states that incentivize a GBC. What we've seen over the past few years is an increase in states listing a green building certification. In particular of note, the amount of states who require a green building certification has doubled over the past 5 years, which we are quite fond of. We list just some specific examples here. We list Illinois as a state who requires enterprise, even though they only require the thresholds within EGC. But the fact that those thresholds include all the healthy material and healthy building practices and energy efficiency, we scored them as a state who requires a green building certification. And so the next section, we evaluated what is energy efficiency. And this was admittedly quite challenging in coming up with a methodology, but we settled on focusing on outcomes instead of process. So practices such as a physical needs assessment, utility coordination, utility allowances, renewable energy provisions were not scored. But instead, we, for new construction, we used an Energy Star certification as the baseline. And again, green building certifications were key here because those like Enterprise and LEED, they require an Energy Star certification in their own standards. Things kind of can get a little tricky because I believe NGBS only incentivizes Energy Star. But again, most seen as though EGC, Enterprise, and LEED are often cited within QAPs. We kind of still gave points for those states who have a green building certification. For moderate rehabilitation, we really focused on energy reduction measures, and this often in what again Brett mentioned earlier is using the HERS index, the home energy rating system, which is the industry standard for the home's energy efficiency is measured and recognized. So a state with so we often saw that within moderate rehabilitation projects, states referencing a HERS score of 75 or lower, 65 or lower. And we really saw that as it's outcome based, a specific measurement of energy reduction as a goal for energy efficiency in rehabilitation projects. And finally, before moving on to Gabby, we evaluated labor standards, local sourcing, and working conditions in qualified allocation plans. This is very, very important to the work we do at BGA, but we decided not to score this for a couple of reasons. One, there's just too many uncertainties in how labor standards are determined and enforced at local and municipal levels. And second, there's oftentimes with LIHTC projects, they're coupled with other funding streams like HUD's Home Investment Partnerships Program, which triggers prevailing wage requirements. So this type of we determined that this type of valuation would really be too arduous and tricky to combine with the other sections. But still, this is really important for us. I think one primary example is looking at California. In California, 53% of construction workers are classified as low income or very low income, and only about half of the projects provide a prevailing wage. So we really see this as an issue of perpetuating the cycle of poverty, where the individuals working on LIHTC projects will need to live in projects subsidized by either LIHTC or another affordable housing subsidy. So we really believe that providing a living wage, providing benefits, adequate benefits for workers is necessary in these projects. We also looked at states who have local sourcing in their QAPs, a requirement for using state or regional manufacturing. We see this as it's not only a boost to the economy, but it supports domestic manufacturing and it lowers greenhouse gas emissions from reduced transportation. And we saw this, for example, in Michigan, one of the only 4 states that have local sourcing. In Michigan, there's a requirement for that projects demonstrate the use of products or goods manufactured by Michigan-based corporations and the need to incorporate them into the development. So I'll turn it over to my colleague Gabby. She'll give an overview of the racial equity section. So Abby, take it away.
Thanks, John. Share my screen. Okay, so like Jeff said, I'll be giving an overview of the racial equity criteria that we developed. When developing the racial equity criteria, we had a thorough approach to ensure that the criteria would be as dynamic and well-rounded as possible, as much as LIHTC can impact racial equity. Our approach included a review of past precedents and Chicago's racial equity impact assessment. We conducted research and stakeholder outreach, as well as convening with an advisory committee to help draft and review scoring criteria. So why is racial equity important? We know racism is woven into the fabric of the United States, and we can see racial inequity in housing specifically be traced back to historically racist housing practices such as redlining, exclusionary zoning, and urban renewal. These practices intentionally marginalized communities of color and left them living in blighted communities, often within proxy to environmental hazards and in subsidizing housing posing serious health risks. For the purpose of the scorecard, Race Forward's definition of racial equity was used, which is the process of changing policies, practices, systems, and structures by prioritizing measurable change in the lives of people of color, eliminating racial disparities, and improving outcomes for everyone. These are some statistics pertaining to racial equity in housing that I'll read off really quickly. There are just 37 rental homes for every 100 extremely low-income renter households. 20% are Black individuals, 18% are Native American or Alaskan Native, 16% are Hispanic, and 6% are white non-Hispanic. Black and Hispanic developers make up less than 1% of total developers in the United States. And going back to healthier building materials that Jeff was mentioning before, BIPOC communities have a disproportionate amount of chemical-linked health conditions. For instance, Native Americans, Alaska Natives, and Black individuals have higher asthma rates, and Black, Hispanic, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islanders have higher rates of birth risks and adverse birth outcomes. And this is why intentional selection of healthier building materials can help to improve health equity. So getting into our findings, commonality found amongst most states across these criteria was the leveraging of combined applications with other federal and state subsidized sources for additional funding streams, supporting production of very low-income units, including incentives for BIPOC developers, and including thresholds for amenities and services such as wellness, childcare, broadband internet, home ownership counseling, and things of that nature. Areas for improvement or items that were not commonly found in QAPs were appeals for residents' applications if an application was denied, partnerships for BIPOC entities, meaning ensuring that BIPOC-led firms are provided with material participation that promotes their growth, as well as community engagement guidance and partnerships, tenant engagement plans, and data and transparency. So getting into the first criteria section, Access answers these two big questions, which are how are LIHTC developments meeting the needs of BIPOC populations, and who is able to gain access to housing subsidized with LIHTC. Researchers have found that there's a lack of family-sized affordable housing units that can accommodate larger household sizes of different BIPOC groups in high-opportunity neighborhoods. So unit size and design emphasizes the importance of creating units accessible to everyone, and that housing needs to be disaggregated by race and ethnicity. The depth and affordability section accentuates the fact that BIPOC households are disproportionately represented among the very low and extremely low household income categories in every state. Although most QAPs do require the production of very low and extremely low income units, and also offer additional points for projects that provide deeper subsidies. For example, South Carolina's QAP includes points for projects that reserve 10% or more units represented in disabled populations earning below 20% of the A line. Outreach and affirmative marketing was designed to ensure that BIPOC communities are aware of affordable housing opportunities and can apply for them. But we saw in our findings that most of this criteria can be met through the FHA, the Fair Housing Act, and most states did use this to meet the criteria. However, in most cases, it was ambiguously defined and hard to determine who was actually adhering to it. Massachusetts, along with Connecticut and New Jersey, are one of the states who has enacted their own marketing regulations. And something that they do is that they require informal meetings for people to learn about the project and receive application assistance. And the final criteria in this section is tenant screening. And we know that BIPOC communities are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system and are more likely than whites to be stopped by police, arrested, and prosecuted for similar crimes. And common tenant screening practices screen for credit histories and records, therefore disproportionately impact BIPOC residents. And some of our tenant screening criteria, prohibits automatic rejection based on conviction record history and consider the nature, severity, and timing of the conviction. The second criteria section is BIPOC developers and service providers. And this answers which professionals benefit from the LIHTC system. Criteria included in this section is BIPOC owned or controlled developers and teams with lived experience. And you can see that most of the states who did achieve criteria in this category achieved this first criteria point. Secondly is including incentive set-asides or thresholds for nonprofit developers beyond the required 10% for community development corporations or community housing development organizations. Eligibility pathways that don't exclude newer BIPOC developers, such as demonstration of trainings or consultant reports, so that newer organizations to LIHTC deals are not excluded by financial strength or experience criteria. Guidance for partnerships and joint ventures, including guarantees to receive a minimum percentage of equity and developer fees, and demonstrate significant role in development decision-making. And then finally, technical assistance and financing tools for emerging BIPOC developers. Community engagement, like the quote says on the screen, is a core tenet of racial equity in ensuring that those closest to the issues are part of identifying and designing the solutions. Most state HFAs lack a collaborative process between decision makers and those who are affected by those decisions. The community engagement score map to the right shows the disconnect between the individuals and communities that LIHTC projects are meant to serve and the HFAs who structure these benefits. Criteria included in this category is the definition of CBOs and communities impacted by housing disparities, tool for effective engagement and partnerships, and proposals responsive to community need and input. Washington's bond and tax credit policies awarded project points for demonstrating that they are by and for the community. And the Washington Housing Finance Commission also supplies an equitable development engagement and community engagement toolkits to assist project sponsors. And you can see on the map to the right that all of the seats in yellow are the seats that had no community engagement criteria met within the scorecard. So amenities and services connected to housing that serve BIPOC communities can help to improve racial disparities in health, wealth, and other outcomes by offering health and wellness care, asset building support, childcare, recreation, and community. Criteria in this category includes submission of service and amenity plans, asset building and home ownership resources, and the requirement of submission of and guidance for tenant engagement plans. The Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future found that residents in service-enriched housing had higher income, employment rates, and healthcare coverage, among other positive outcomes, when compared to families and properties without service. Mississippi's QAP incentivizes applicants to submit a memorandum of understanding between the project and a service provider, and Arkansas's QAP requires supportive services for disabled populations that are optional for tenants. So the location and siting criteria includes criteria in high opportunity areas with proximity to amenities, and to ensure that they are away from environmental health risks. 47 states met the high opportunity criteria, but we do want to acknowledge the opportunity paradigm, which implies that to access opportunity and social mobility, low-income people of color would have to move from their communities into opportunity neighborhoods, and this would further devalue already disinvested neighborhoods. Intentional and direct policy planning regulations can help to remedy this disinvestment that can happen. And only 18 states included criteria that aim to minimize and manage risk exposure to environmental hazards within the bounds of their QAP. And the final category is data and transparency. In order to track success at meeting racial equity outcomes, HFAs and advocates need LIHTC project data reporting, including on tenant demographics, disabled units, and project teams. Almost no state had any of the criteria marked off in this category, so there's definitely rooms for improvement. But some states that led by example was in Oregon, where their fund offerings require demographic information from the proposed general contractors, as well in North Dakota, where tenant demographic reporting is required as part of the annual compliance monitoring process. And that's it for me.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Gabby. Thank you so much, Jeff. I assume those are all the slides you have, or did you have anything else to get into, Jeff?
No, we just want to be open for any questions folks have.
Yeah, great. Well, let's get into those questions. I already see a couple of them coming in. And before we do jump into the questions, just a real quick reminder that if you want to rewatch this session, share it online, access it later, share it with a colleague, you name it, you can head over to our YouTube channel and you'll see it there in the next couple days, or you can click subscribe and you'll get an instant update when it is available. And for those of you watching this course in the future, but not right now, but on demand, make sure to take your quiz with an 80% passing rate. And when you complete that, you will receive your continuing ed. For those of you here today, as long as you are appropriately logged into Zoom with the name you want printed on your certificate, and you've been here for the entire CEU hour, you will receive your certificates at certs@gutenbergcerts.com. Check your spam over the next couple days and you'll get it. And as those questions are rolling in, just a quick thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, our executive director, Jose Reyna, and all of our members, nearly 300 members, and our top tier sponsors, especially Mitsubishi and Rheem, who are providing air source heat pump technology. All of our sponsors are going to help your projects meet the QAP for their green building certification. So make sure to check them out, and thank you to their support. So yeah, the first question that came in, I believe, was for you here, Jeff, and that is as described in your ABCs of the LHI, low income housing tax credits, Are there any restrictions in various states on the international location of the buyers or sellers of the tax credits or the developers of the LHIs?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think you know, I don't know if folks can see. I think I tried to answer in the Q&A section, but I'm unaware of, and not to say that there aren't any, but I'm not too sure if there are restrictions for syndicators or financiers in the commercial side who are working with developers when they receive the tax credits. That's I could certainly look into that. It's not really an area I'm certain on, but I can say that there are. Most states have preferences that developers are either based within the state or within the region at large. A lot of developers have a scope of like 3 to 4 states, and if they're I think a lot of state housing finance agencies have a preference to work with those developers who already have a past experience or located within a certain distance to that state.
So there was a clarification on acronyms. So hopefully anyone watching this, obviously in the future can pause it and go look up an acronym. But to be clear, you had referenced CHDO, which is Community Housing Development Organization, BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, LIHTC, which is, if you don't know that, well, you're starting from the beginning on that one. Low income housing tax credits, QAP, qualification allocation plan. Anything else briefly anyone should have known? I think CDC was another one mentioned, and I don't think you meant the Center for Disease Control.
Yeah. Gabby, I don't know if you mentioned that CDC anywhere. I wasn't too sure. Besides the Center for Disease Control, did I miss that?
Well, let me go back in the slide and check. This was on.
Oh, you were referencing health issues, so maybe that was centered in disease.
Community Development Corporations.
That's right. I should have known that. All right. Well, we'll go with those ones, and anything else you all can go back and look. So, the question is so there's a question about the grade, and just to be clear, these grades are based on the state's efforts and not the city's. But answer that question and then follow up. Are there any cities that have boosted LIHTCs that kind of go in and above or around? And I kind of think of it like a building code. Like states have their own building codes, but then some cities have stretch codes. Is there anything like that in the LIHTC world?
Well, just to be clear, so our evaluation was just on what is included within either the qualified allocation plan or oftentimes states will have a corresponding documents that are referenced within a QAP that are aligned with that a developer has to abide by. I think Michigan is an example. Their QAP is only about 40 pages and doesn't reference the green building policy, but or doesn't include the green building policy, but it references it, and that's a separate document. At least I believe that's the case on the top of my head. But we did include Chicago and New York City within our scoring guideline. I think Chicago scored poorly. Although I think they're updating their QAP that will to include some either a GBC or what we would consider healthy building practices. And one thing I want to note, I forgot to mention it when I was speaking. All the research that we did was for QAPs up to the end of 2022. So there are a number of states who've already updated their QAP over the past 8 months. So those are, if any changes during that period are not reflected in our scoring.
True. Yeah. Everything's being outdated. So of course this will be dated at some point. So do you plan to keep it up to date?
Again, good question. I think I'm unsure. I certainly don't want to commit to anything, but I think if we do, it would be it wouldn't be yearly, but maybe in maybe in 2 to 3 years we might do that when all states those who review theirs biannually will have when we'll give states an opportunity to amend their QAP from the last time we reviewed them. So that's what we're considering internally.
So this is a very loaded question, and I don't know how much you want to try to tackle it, but briefly, obviously, if someone's making a decision to do affordable housing, and I, know just from my own small insider knowledge that trying to work with the state housing agency through the QAP, it's a lot of work. So just can you briefly, if someone's making this decision, what would prompt them to work through the QAP and LIHTC versus just avoiding that and doing something else?
Well, I think that the subsidies help. I mean, I think that's. I mean, there certainly are hoops to jump through. I think we hear all the time of the administrative burden that can go along with applying for LIHTC, and if you're awarded the tax credits, there's additional work to be done. But I think that the fact that they're, especially the 9% credits, are so competitive speaks to the fact that many people want to get involved with those. I think there's also opportunities to partner with other groups. I think we've seen that with there are preferences to many states have preferences for partnering with an emerging developer with one who has significant experience within a state. So I think there's opportunities there. But yeah, I think there's just the fact that they're the subsidy, the credits are so competitive speaks for why people want to get involved in the space.
Speaking of partner development, I mean, if you had mentioned, Gabby, I think you pointed out, was it less than 1% of the developers were from a BIPAC demographic? So is there, and I know some of these LIHTC programs, it's kind of like you can't get in, right? Because it just keeps getting awarded to the same old people. But are there states actually incentivizing these kinds of partnerships? So you're mentoring in and bringing someone new in. Is that a route maybe?
Yeah, I believe that it's in part of the criteria, partnering with BIPOC developers or service providers can get you points in the scorecard.
Oh, great. So, big picture here, you had mentioned prevailing wage, and if I recall right, you essentially all the states would have scored equal on prevailing wage because they all equally didn't do it. I mean, is that an accurate statement, Jeff?
Yeah, I don't think there's not one state where any prevailing wage was mentioned within a QAP. There are several states who have some sort of, I think maybe Alaska and Washington, D.C. Reference apprenticeship training. But that's really the extent of any references to labor or work conditions within QAPs. But again, oftentimes those are triggered through other funding streams or are. You mentioned building or stretch codes. A lot of local or municipalities have their own requirements related to those.
Okay. Well, what I was getting at is, now with the Inflation Reduction Act, projects can get upwards of $5,000 per unit or $5 per square foot for renovations if they leverage, these green programs. So they kind of go hand in hand. But I believe to get the really big dollars, you have to use prevailing wage to get it. And so in my preliminary conversations with developers, even with that, they're like, prevailing wage kills the deal. Like even if I got all the IRA dollars in the world, we could never afford to pay it. And then equally, we hear the complaint that, oh, if we've got to deal with some of these racial equity issues, again, we'll never be able to afford to build anything. So how do you push back against that mentality? Like, what is the conversation? Because these developers are actively stalling out these progress on the QAPs, because they say, again, they'll never be able to do a project if they have to comply with anything like that.
Sure. Well, I can't speak to every circumstance or situation, but
Right.
I think that the goal being that these are either subsidized or financed, or there's other funding mechanisms that help alleviate some of these issues. That's hopefully addressing some of those concerns. There's again, well, and this, I guess, we did this project on the low income housing tax credit, and there's certainly benefits to it, but I think there's also areas of criticism, because I think there's a lot of money involved, and a lot of people who are not developers, or not certainly not the tenants, are benefit from this. So I think that I would argue that especially the 9% credits are very generous. So I mean, hopefully those speak to address some of those cost concerns that people have, because there are it's very profitable for a significant amount of people in the process.
Anything to add on that side, Gabby, from your perspective?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. So I want to, on the flip side of what I just said, there are certainly developers out there who are going above and beyond the requirements, at least on the green side. I've talked to some developers who are like, we wouldn't pay anything but prevailing wage. That would just be silly. So I hear both sides. And so what, if let's say the states are not acting, what do you say to the developers who are like, what can you say to encourage them to act on their own accord and implement these protocols to ensure higher green standards, prevailing wage, equity, without the state's help?
Well, I think speaking particularly for some the green side of things, I think there's often a complaint that building or designing green is more costly, and I think we would push back on that. We do a quick plug. Our buildingclean.org website lists local and regional manufacturers for energy efficiency products, and highlighting which products have equal labels and would be considered green. But I think I think just saying this, assuming that just because you're trying to go green, be more sustainable, use building products that are chemical free, that those cost more. I think that's there's some circumstances where that's true, but by and large, there are alternatives that are very cost competitive.
So we've got your report. We see where there are deficiencies in the states. What's next? Let's say I live in a state and I want my QAP to be better. What do you recommend? What is the next step? And I know it's different every state, but just in general.
Yeah, well, most states have they'll have an open comment period where individuals, organizations can provide their input. But I would recommend, but at the same time, state housing finance agencies will, I think, will accept input really anytime during the year. And oftentimes when you're providing your insight or recommendations during a state's comment period, that's really the decisions have already been made. It's kind of the writing's already on the wall. So I just recommend reaching out to your state agency, as soon as possible, because trying to get plant some seeds of what you prefer to see within your QAP before the oftentimes the state will have their initial draft. So trying to plant those seeds before that's produced, because again, oftentimes that initial draft, there's not much differentiation after a state has their comment period.
And is this ever a point where are there some states where it's more normal if you have a concern to get the legislature involved in anything, or is that typically always just deferred to the housing and you don't want to, the legislature wouldn't do anything?
I think that's certainly a route to go on. But oftentimes the QAP is just something that the state housing finance agency develops, and it's signed off by the governor.
Sure.
I know I don't have any examples offhand, but I asked this question to a colleague who's more in tune on these issues than I am, and I think they cited that state legislatures have gotten involved in the past, but that's more of a unique situation rather than something that regularly happens.
Okay. And I wanted to offer another opportunity for those of you in the Midwest. We're members of the Midwest Decarbonization Coalition, and they have a very large work group of QAP for green and equity. So if you want to join a coalition of folks actively engaged in all of the Midwest, whatever that is, you know it when you see it. It's pretty encompassing, so I'd encourage you all to check them out and get engaged there. So, well, we are a little bit over our time, but I appreciate both of you sticking around and answering some different folks' questions. Another great thing I think I wanted to bring up about you all is your Building Clean website. So again, this is a tool you all have available at the BlueGreen Alliance Foundation, to help people make more decisions on the materials for their green programs, correct?
Yes, yeah, and we've just updated. I don't know if folks have ever visited our website in the past, but we've just updated it, and it's cleaner, a little fresher, and hopefully, won't give you a headache, perhaps like our old one did. But yeah, recommend folks going to it if you have any, looking for local or manufacturers within the United States.
Great. Well, where else, just as a reminder, Jeff, can people go to get more information, download this report, learn about the BlueGreen Alliance Foundation if they want to?
Yeah, again, I just stress going to the Building Clean website. We have a link to the QAP report, as well as additional information on hazardous chemicals and materials. I know we mentioned VOCs quite a bit, but like looking at it, showing why volatile organic chemicals are hazardous for short-term and long-term health issues. So we dive a little bit deeper in terms of equity issues and health concerns regarding hazardous chemicals.
All right. Well, Jeff, Gabby, I really appreciate you for your time coming on and talking through this important work and this important report. And I always appreciate the BlueGreen Alliance Foundation for your longtime membership and support of us, for being engaged in our local low-income housing work group here in the state of Michigan, and I'm sure many other states, and all the other great things I see you all are doing on the newsletter that I'm on and across social media. So I hope everyone will find a way to engage and learn more and go check you all out. So thank you so much for your time. Take care and have a great rest of your week, everyone. Goodbye.
Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.